Scripture reading comes to us from the Lamsa translation of the Bible, from the first book of Samuel, chapter 10, verses 6 through 7. And we read, "And the Spirit of the Lord will come upon you, and you shall prophesy with them, and you shall be changed into another man. And it shall be when these signs come to you that you shall do whatever you wish, for the Lord is with you." And thus ends the reading of the Scripture, first book of Samuel, chapter 10, verses 6 through 7. Today I'm going to speak about signs and synchronicities and how they aren't always what we think they are. In the first book of Samuel, we learn that Samuel, a seer or a prophet, has been impressed by God to anoint Saul as a future king. Samuel tells Saul that he will become a seer himself and will be changed into another man in preparation for becoming king. Saul symbolizes our personal will, and Samuel represents our spiritual judgment and discernment. Samuel is that still small voice within us that knows what is best and will guide us if we only listen to it. Saul represents our ego, our personality, our sense consciousness, all these things that can sometimes be influenced by the outer world. And if we are completely allowing ourselves to be under control of the personality, the ego, the personal will, the sense consciousness, we may not trust our inner spiritual guidance. We might not want to listen to Samuel, and we might tend to seek validation in the outer world instead of from within us, from our higher self. So this is why we need spiritual discernment and judgment. We need our inner Samuel. Samuel said that Saul will be changed into another man by God. This transformation was necessary because Saul needed to be given another heart by which he could be guided to lead his people. As divine metaphysicians, we take a very macro view of Scripture, and we consider the groups of people in the Bible might symbolize different kinds of thoughts in the mind, sense thoughts, spiritual thoughts. Saul's new job as king was going to be to redirect the mind's thoughts from sense consciousness to spiritual consciousness, from the worldly to the godly. Once Saul was remade, or we might say awakened, made self-aware, he could prophesy and interpret spiritual signs. Saul went on to achieve victory over the Philistines, which are those worldly thoughts, and the idea that we can sustain ourselves based on outer things alone. This makes sense because we know that man really cannot survive on bread alone, but rather needs that spiritual manna or substance that's only provided by source. Scripture goes on to say, "And it shall be when these signs come to you that you shall do whatever you wish, for the Lord is with you." Once Saul is changed into a new man and moves from supporting that worldly sense consciousness to supporting the spiritual consciousness, he is sure to receive signs to guide him. That still small voice will be available to him. Samuel is by his side, or rather within him. When we commit to our spiritual path, we always receive support. We never walk alone. And we know that our higher self often does not speak per se, it shows. It shows us or makes us aware of things to get our attention, and it gives us these spiritual breadcrumbs to lead us to choose the path of highest soul growth. Signs and synchronicities are the ways in which a divine mind can orchestrate meaningful experiences for us in our lives. Samuel began his priestly life hearing the call of Source whispering in his ear at night. No one else heard that voice but Samuel, but he never doubted that he'd heard it. This is an interesting thing to me because it suggests that these spiritual signs are often what we would call subjective experiences. And that leads many of us skeptical folks to question whether they even happened at all. Even Eli, the priest who had charge over Samuel in his training, doubted that Samuel had heard someone and go back to bed, until the third time Samuel was called. After Samuel had been awakened 3 times, Eli finally put things together and understood that it was God who was calling to Samuel. Why did it take 3 times for him to figure this out? I think it's because something happening once or twice really feels kind of random or coincidental, but three times is a lot less likely to be random. And how many times in our own lives, on our own journey, have we questioned things? Just like Eli, when a synchronicities happened, or we feel like we're seeing a sign, maybe from a loved one or from spirit. You know, we see a bird that we know our grandmother loved so dearly. Oh, was it a sign from her, or was it just my imagination? Maybe we see something physical crossing our path, a flower, a feather, a penny. So was that a message? Was it a coincidence? You know, we have this gray zone if we're using our rational mind along with our heart and our spirit. We can think about, well, what were we thinking about before this happened? Was our mind naturally led in this direction because of what we were doing? Was it a mental suggestion? Was it an internal bias? Is this trickery? Is this chance? My mind goes everywhere, right? Carl Jung defined a synchronicity as something that describes circumstances that appear meaningfully connected, yet lack a causal connection. So synchronicities are events that appear meaningfully related despite having no causal connection. Our minds make that gap, that make that jump. We make the intuitive connections between the events. Signs are something that suggests or indicates the presence or existence of something else. That bird represents my grandma because she liked blue jays. So it's personal, it's subjective, it's meaningful to me. These things are mainly subjective, so we do need to be on guard about our internal biases that can help us create connections where there may or may not be any. Signs could be more likely to be spiritually or, originating when there are lots of these things happening in a short period of time. You know, you go shopping and you see 3 white feathers. You hear the word Mary on the radio or presented to you in daily life 4 times, and you're thinking, there's someone Mary that you know in spirit. The more instances we have, the less likely we are to think it's just chance. So sometimes that's how spirit gets through to us. Sometimes the circumstances are just too coincidental to really feel like coincidence. Maybe an item or someone you were thinking of suddenly crosses your path or appears in your view, or you get that phone call on the phone. When signs or synchronicities present to us in an unusual context, it gets our attention, and that's the point. That's one of the ways spirit will send us messages to help guide us on our path. It validates us, right? It gives us a validation that we're not alone and that there is something bigger than us that's going on. These spiritual breadcrumbs bolster our faith, and they can point us toward the most productive path for our soul's growth. Like the soon-to-be anointed King Saul, we have to be changed into a new way of thinking where we lead with the spiritual consciousness instead of the sense consciousness to pick up on these signs. But getting started in this way can be kind of hard. We can start by telling the universe that we're open to receiving guidance and signs, and then we can stay aware, watching and listening and waiting, and being observant, paying attention to see what comes. This is a really cool way to live because it brings a lot of joy and hope. And when you do get something that you feel is a sign, your heart really lifts up and you feel very elated and it lifts your spirit. But it does mean that we have to discern a few things, mostly 2 things. First of all, what is the meaning of the sign? And second of all, okay, great, now what? What do I have to do? Do I have to do anything with this sign? What has to happen inside us to help us accurately discern messages like this and signs? Our higher self is our internal compass. It can guide us through anything. When we're in conscious contact with that higher self, we can know what's up and how to handle life. But we really have to work to become aware and to stay aware of that higher self, that little light that shines within us, that I am that lives and moves through us. This is the hard part. So many times we're not quite fully aware of the spirit within us, or we're not settled and grounded in a place of spiritual calm where we can trust ourselves to really read and interpret the signs and synchronicities that might be going on. Then we're at risk of making a snap judgment that can lead us down a path and maybe we would have really liked to go. Sort of how you sometimes take an exit off the road suddenly when you see a sign that sparks your attention and holds it. And you think, I gotta go check that out. Okay, so maybe you were supposed to take that turn, or Maybe you were supposed to just be made aware by seeing that sign. Maybe be aware of something evoked by that sign. Discerning which action is the proper one is a subtler detail of living life as a divine metaphysician. It takes time, experience, and practice to learn this. You're going to mess up a few times, and it's not going to happen overnight, I can guarantee you. Here's an example from my life. Recently, we've been researching locations for retirement just because I like to plan ahead. That's how I am. So I found an area that I liked, and I started looking at real estate. And in the meantime, I thought, oh, I know so-and-so who lives there. I'm going to send her an email and see what she thinks of the place, and maybe she can help me, understand it better. So she wrote me back this beautiful email, lots of detailed information. I was so grateful. I was like, wow, I know more about this place than ever. This is awesome. And at the end, she said, we're going to be selling our house soon. Whoa, I thought, this is an interesting synchronicity. So we corresponded some more, and I got her address, and she sent me some pictures, and I thought, well, this is really a nice place, I don't know. What if this is a sign? Maybe we're supposed to buy the house and move there. The synchronicity was really pretty undeniable. But I also knew that in the past, sometimes signs present to me that they're not supposed to trigger action on my part. They're supposed to trigger awareness and further thinking and investigation. So, okay, how do I know the difference? Well, I had asked my friend for her address, and she gave it to me, and I went and did some Googling and looking around, and I found the property. And I realized there was this one characteristic about the property that was really a big deal for us. And it really wasn't going to work out. It wasn't what we needed. And I thought, I feel so disappointed. But this is an important thing to know. And it's best that I know it now, because maybe that's not the decision buying the house that would be in our best interest. However, the information she gave me was valuable. Gosh, that was at least a sign and worth something. And I'm still grateful. But this told me that this was a stepping stone kind of a sign, not an action step kind of a sign. Sometimes we have to pause and ask which is being represented by what we're seeing and realizing with the sign or synchronicity. Scripture says, and it shall be when these signs come to you that you shall do whatever you wish, for the Lord is with you. If we're tuned into our higher self, we can discern what we should do, for it is only there waiting to guide us. Now, how do we go about discerning these things? How do we know if something's a stepping stone or an action step? I really like the book, The River of Life, How to Live in the Flow by Marilyn J. Autry, because she talks about all the natural laws, and she speaks to the law of awareness. And this is something that I've kind of taken an excerpt from. About the law of awareness, she says, everything that comes into your awareness assists you. It is necessary to pay attention to those thought waves that sweep through your mind. Allow those inner feelings to become one with you. Once your intuitive nature is expanded, it allows for a greater perception of everything. Your intuitive nature is limitless. Once you begin to trust your intuition, life becomes easier. Intuition is not a substitute for reason, but reason tends to act on the information brought to it through the gateway of intuition. By becoming fully aware of yourself and all that surrounds you, you will result in successful experiences of intuition. So we can become more aware and more intuitive by watching our mind first and foremost. We start noticing, where is our attention drawn to and why? How do we feel when this occurs? We weren't thinking about somebody, but poof, there they are in our mind, or, oh, my eye is suddenly drawn over here. This internal, disciplined self-analysis kind of a process sounds goofy, but it really helps you begin to see where your attention is. And this helps a lot when you're developing your intuition. Regarding that retirement location research, my mind noticed how coincidental it was that my casual inquiry about, hey, how do you like living in such and such a place, turned into a possible home buying opportunity. That was still something. The second thing we can do is observe our body and our feelings, especially in reaction to seeing or feeling or experiencing what we think is a sign. How we feel speaks to our energetic state, and we may feel something that we were not consciously aware of that might inform us on a deeper level about what's going on. Do we feel nervous, happy, sad, wistful, distant, involved? This is a more subtle stage of developing our intuition, intention, and then feeling. If we are someone who tends to kind of ignore our bodies and not really pay attention to how we feel and what our body is doing, it might take us a little while to work on this skill. But these are subtle energetic shifts that can be very informative. When I realized I had an opportunity to purchase this home sooner than I thought, I felt anxious. I felt a little worried. I wasn't ready for this, my body told me physically. My energy was a little off. So this is really valuable for me to know, and it was my clue personally that I needed to look a little deeper. If we're aware that we notice something that seems like a sign, and we're aware of our feelings, then now we're ready for that step of deciding, now what? Is this something I need to take action on? Do I buy the house? Or is it a stepping stone to something else I need to do or pay attention to? Do I keep researching this area? Maybe look further, look into the house. And I think this is honestly the hardest part to suss out when you're on a spiritual path. This is the place where I feel we are most prone to make a mistake or a misstep. This is also where our personal beliefs and biases can come into play, with or without us even realizing it. So think about when people go to a tarot card reader. They want to ask for insight about someone they'd like to have a relationship with. They're often already invested in feeling a certain way, right? They know kind of what they want. They just want to hear somebody say it and confirm it or validate it. So they may or may not be able to really take on any advice that's contrary to what they want. And sometimes your vision is just a little colored, okay, by what your desired outcome is. This is humanity at work. We just do this. Sometimes it's by our ego or our personality, or maybe in that case, we seem like we are already invested in the outcome. I think in that condition, we're more likely to view a sign or a synchronicity that pops up as a validation for an action step. Go get that car, go sign that lease, go jump in that plane and go do that thing, take that action. We're more likely to pull the trigger on our intention. But this is also a great thing where we might be saying later, oh, I was so sure it was a sign. And we all have stories, right, about this kind of thing where hindsight was 20/20. But if we trust our inner Samuel or our higher self, we can avoid some of this. Not every sign requires us to jump up and take action. Sometimes these breadcrumbs, these spiritual breadcrumbs, are designed to lead us across a path that's for our soul growth. Our higher self needs to experience something, so it's leading us in this direction. Sometimes it's not always pleasant, but there's always learning involved, that's for sure. Some signs might be a heads up about something that's coming down the line so that you kind of know. And when you're there and you have that moment, you're not caught off guard and you can be more calm and mindful and react appropriately when it happens. You can handle things, more groundedly. There's a myriad of reasons we receive spiritual signs and synchronicities, and so they're not always meant for us to take action on. When we become very routinely used to watching our thoughts and following our feelings, and we start to realize that we are getting pretty good at knowing what's going on, and when we're really receiving genuine signs from spirit, and we can figure out what they mean in our lives, in our current context, then we are changed into that different man that scripture describes. We live by leading with our spiritual instinct instead of our physical one. We can start to feel an outcome before we are even intellectually or logically conscious of it or able to anticipate what it's going to be. We might start to just know things without being able to put into words how or why we do. If we prophecy or deliver a message to other people, sometimes we get visions or information that comes in that's not coming through a means that we can connect to our current conscious state. So now we're starting to get into that flow. When we are changed into another form, a spiritual being, that Samuel, we start really honoring and living that Samuel. We are able to remove the influence of our ego and personal will from our decision-making processes. We can see things from that 30,000-foot macro eagle's eye view. This kind of transformation comes with a lot of life experience, and I think it can be very hard because honestly, in my life, it was the result of a lot of messing up in my decision making about what to do when I encountered things that I thought were signs, but I wasn't sure. Maybe I took action and went, oops, later, you know? So we can practice this over and over, learning how to tell when we need to take action versus viewing a sign as a stepping stone. Over and over, we can continue to invite and reinvite source into our spiritual consciousness until that higher self becomes a familiar tenant in our mind and in our inner dialogue, where we can talk to it and it can talk to us at any time, and we actually listen to its wisdom. When we allow Samuel, that higher self, to inform Saul, our personal will, of what's the best path forward, we'll always make good decisions. Let's keep trying to get there. And so it is.